Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. As Mark left the bistro that night, his mind was swirling with confusion. How could he marry a woman he didn't know, someone who was decades older than him? But then again, how could he refuse? His family was in ruins, his future uncertain, and here was an opportunity that could change everything. Mark knew the decision he had to make wouldn't be easy, but in his heart, he felt that he had no choice. He needed to think. And so, he walked away, the weight of the decision pressing down on him, unsure of what his future would hold. Mark thought for a moment, then nodded. He couldn't keep running from his problems. He needed to do something to protect his future and the future of his mother and sister. That evening, he made his decision. He would go back to Eleanor. He would take the offer, no matter how strange it seemed. To be continued. The following morning, Mark sat at the small kitchen table in his modest apartment, staring at the cup of cold coffee in front of him. His mind was racing. He had spent the night thinking about Eleanor's proposal, turning the words over and over again in his head. Could he really marry a woman he didn't know, especially under such strange circumstances? The more he thought about it, the more it seemed like his only way out. His family was struggling, his future uncertain, and here was a lifeline opportunity to erase his debts and secure a future he had never dared dream of. But at what cost? Mark sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. He knew that if he turned this down, he might be throwing away the only chance to change his life. He couldn't ignore the weight of the decision. His mother's voice echoed in his head, reminding him that this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all of them. He had to make a choice, and he needed to do it soon. Without another thought, he grabbed his jacket and headed out the door. As he made his way to the bistro, the sky was overcast, and a chill hung in the air. Mark's steps felt heavy, each one pulling him closer to a future he wasn't sure he was ready for. He arrived at the bistro just as the clock struck 7. Eleanor was already seated at the same corner table, her presence commanding attention as she sipped her tea. She looked exactly as he remembered, elegant, composed, and completely in control. Mark hesitated for a moment before walking over and taking a seat across from her. She gave him a brief, knowing smile but said nothing, as if waiting for him to speak. "I've made my decision," Mark said, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. Eleanor set her tea down, her gaze never leaving him. "I'll marry you. For the arrangement. For the debts." His heart pounded in his chest as he said the words, feeling the weight of the commitment settle on him like a heavy cloak. Eleanor's expression softened, just slightly, and she nodded. "Good," she replied, her voice cool but approving. "We begin immediately." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a folder filled with paperwork. "Here are the terms of our agreement. It's straightforward. No love, no expectations. Just a contract between us. You will remain in the city for the duration of our agreement, and we will attend events as required. This is a professional arrangement, and that's all it will ever be. Understand?" Mark nodded, his mind swirling with a mix of emotions. The paperwork was laid out before him, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of detachment. He had no idea what he was getting into, but this was his reality now. This was how he was going to survive, and how he was going to help his family. He glanced up at Eleanor, her face unreadable, and signed the papers without a second thought. As soon as he finished, Eleanor closed the folder and pushed it across the table toward him. "We'll begin with the gala next week," she said, her voice authoritative. "It's a charity event, and I expect you to be there with me, by my side. We'll present ourselves as a couple. There's no room for mistakes. You will need to behave accordingly, and I will be keeping a close eye on you. Any questions?" Mark shook his head, still trying to process everything that had just happened. No. I understand, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Good. I'll have the car pick you up at 6, be ready. She didn't wait for a response before walking out of the bistro, leaving Mark sitting there, feeling more lost than ever. Over the next few days, Mark did everything he could to prepare for the gala. He bought a new suit, practiced his etiquette in front of the mirror, and tried to wrap his head around the new reality he had entered. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was playing a role, pretending to be someone he wasn't. But as much as he tried to focus on the practicalities, he couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor. She was so confident, so powerful, and he felt small in comparison. He didn't know what was going to happen at the gala, or what his life would be like now that he was tied to her in this strange arrangement, but he knew one thing for sure: he was in deeper than he had ever imagined. The night of the gala arrived, and Mark stood in front of the mirror in his new suit, trying to steady his nerves. He had never been to an event like this, and the thought of walking into a room full of wealthy strangers made his stomach twist with anxiety. As he stood there, adjusting his tie for the 10th time, he heard the sound of the car outside. He took a deep breath, grabbed his coat, and walked out the door, ready to face whatever was waiting for him. As the car pulled up to the venue, Mark's heart began to race. The grand building loomed before him, its lights shining brightly against the dark sky. He stepped out of the car and followed the valet inside, where he was immediately swept into the whirlwind of the gala. Everywhere he looked, there were wealthy socialites, powerful business figures, and celebrities mingling with ease. And there, standing at the entrance, was Eleanor, waiting for him. She smiled when she saw him, her eyes glinting with something unreadable. "You made it," she said, her voice cool but warm with approval. "Follow my lead, and don't stray from the plan. This is our world now, Mark. Don't forget that." As they walked into the room together, Mark couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline. He was out of his element, but Eleanor's presence seemed to ground him. She led him through the crowd, introducing him to various influential people, all while keeping up the pretense of their marriage. Mark was beginning to understand that this was more than just an arrangement, it was a performance, and he was playing a part that he wasn't sure he could master. But as the night wore on, something changed. Mark found himself drawn to Eleanor in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't the cold, businesslike connection he had anticipated. There was something deeper beneath the surface, something more human. The way she held herself, the way she moved through the crowd with such poise, it made him feel like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a business transaction. Maybe there was more to this than he thought. To be continued. As the night of the gala continued, Mark found himself drifting through the crowd, following Eleanor's lead, all the while feeling more like a spectator than a participant. He had never imagined himself in a room like this, surrounded by people who seemed to live in a different world. His nerves had started to settle, but there was still an underlying sense of unease. Eleanor was in her element, greeting people with ease, laughing at jokes, and making introductions that seemed to carry weight. Mark, on the other hand, was trying to keep up, his mind racing with thoughts of how out of place he felt. But something about Eleanor's presence kept him grounded. She moved through the crowd with an air of confidence and power, and Mark found himself watching her more closely than he intended. Her every gesture seemed calculated, yet effortless, and there was a coolness to her that fascinated him. She was beautiful, no doubt, but it was her strength and self-assurance that really caught his attention. As they made their way to a quieter corner of the event space, Eleanor leaned in and whispered, "Remember, we're a team tonight. Stick to the plan, and everything will be fine." Mark nodded, trying to suppress the growing sense of admiration he was feeling for her. He couldn't deny that she intrigued him in ways he hadn't expected. Just as they were about to move to another group, Eleanor's phone buzzed, and she stepped away for a moment to take the call. Mark, left standing alone for the first time that night, took a deep breath and tried to calm his racing thoughts. He was doing well, wasn't he? He had followed Eleanor's instructions to the letter, made small talk with the right people, and kept up the appearance of their marriage with ease. But why was he suddenly feeling like there was more to this than just a simple contract? Why did it feel like he was getting too close to something he wasn't prepared for? As he stood there, deep in thought, a familiar voice broke through his haze. "I never would have guessed you'd fit in so well here," came the voice of a man Mark had just been introduced to earlier that evening. Mark turned to see Thomas, a well-dressed businessman in his mid-50s, smiling at him with a hint of amusement in his eyes. Mark offered a polite smile in return. "Just following Eleanor's lead," he replied, feeling a little self-conscious. Thomas chuckled, taking a step closer. "Well, you're doing a good job. Not everyone can keep up in a room like this." Mark's nerves flared up again, but he forced himself to stay calm. He wasn't used to this kind of praise, especially not from someone like Thomas, who seemed to have everything together. As the evening wore on, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The conversations around him had become more familiar, and he had started to find his rhythm, blending into the group of high-powered individuals without feeling completely out of place. Still, his mind kept returning to Eleanor. There was something about her, something in the way she handled herself, the way she spoke, the way she seemed to always be in control that kept drawing him in. Despite the business arrangement they had, despite the contract they had signed, Mark couldn't help but wonder if there was more to their connection than he realized. Finally, as the night was drawing to a close, Eleanor returned to his side. She smiled at him, a small but genuine smile that made Mark's heart skip a beat. "You did well tonight," she said, her voice warm but still carrying that authoritative tone. "I knew you would. Just keep doing what you did tonight, and you'll have no problems." Mark nodded, feeling a rush of relief wash over him. But as they left the gala together, walking side by side toward the waiting car, he couldn't ignore the feeling that something had changed between them. The lines between business and personal had started to blur, and Mark wasn't sure what to make of it. The next morning, Mark woke up to an empty apartment. Eleanor had left him a message, thanking him for his performance the night before and reminding him of the next steps in their arrangement. As he read the message, a strange feeling of longing washed over him. He had come into this marriage with the mindset that it was strictly a business deal, nothing more, nothing less. But now, as he thought about Eleanor and their night together, he found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, he was starting to feel something more. He shook the thought from his mind. He couldn't afford to get caught up in emotions. Not now. Not when everything was still so uncertain. The days following the gala were filled with more meetings, more events, and more moments that made Mark question what he was really getting himself into. Eleanor was as distant as ever, but there was something in her eyes, some to me's a flicker of something that Mark couldn't quite place. She remained professional, of course, but every once in a while, he caught glimpses of something more. Maybe it was the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, or how her tone softened just a little when they spoke unknown. Whatever it was, it made him wonder, was this really just a business deal, or was there something deeper at play? As the week went by, Mark began to realize that he was caught in a situation he didn't fully understand. He had entered into this arrangement with the intention of securing his future, but he was starting to feel like he was losing control of his own emotions. Eleanor had become a constant presence in his life, and though they weren't in love, the connection between them was undeniable. He wasn't sure where this would lead, but he knew one thing for sure: things were no longer as simple as they seemed. To be continued. As the days went by, Mark found himself growing more accustomed to his new life. His days were filled with meetings, events, and all the usual activities that came with being married to Eleanor, the powerful businesswoman who had taken him in as her husband for the sake of a contract. But things were starting to feel different. Every time he looked at Eleanor, he saw more than just the woman who had saved him from his debts. He saw a woman who was always in control, always one step ahead, and despite the contract that tied them together, Mark couldn't deny the attraction he was beginning to feel. It was confusing, unsettling, and something he wasn't sure he was ready to confront. He had entered this arrangement with the clear intention of helping his family and securing his future, but now, he was questioning everything. One evening, after another gala event, Eleanor and Mark found themselves alone in their apartment. The city lights outside cast a soft glow on the walls, and the quiet hum of the city below seemed far away. Eleanor was sitting on the couch, her usual cool demeanor softened by the late hour. She was reading through some documents, but Mark couldn't help but notice the way her fingers traced the edges of the papers. It was a small gesture, but for some reason, it made him feel like he was seeing a different side of her, one that wasn't as distant or calculated as she often appeared. "You did well tonight," Eleanor said, looking up from her papers. Mark nodded, but he could feel the tension in the air between them. Something was different tonight. It was as if the contract they had signed no longer held the same meaning it once did. He wasn't just her husband in name anymore, he was starting to feel like a real part of her world, and it scared him. "Thank you," Mark replied, his voice quiet. "But I still don't understand why you're doing all this." "You don't need to help me, Eleanor. You don't owe me anything." Eleanor's expression softened for a moment, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She leaned back on the couch, crossing her legs. "You're right. I don't owe you anything. But sometimes, Mark, it's not about what we owe. It's about what we choose to give." Her words were heavy with meaning, and Mark couldn't help but wonder if she was talking about more than just the money, more than just the contract. Was she talking about something deeper? He didn't know what to say to that. It was hard to imagine Eleanor, the woman who had built her empire from the ground up, thinking in terms of something as soft as choice and giving. But then again, maybe he was starting to see the woman behind the businesswoman. Maybe there was more to her than he had initially thought. Mark stood up, walking over to the window and looking out at the skyline. "I don't want to mess this up," he said, more to himself than to her. "I don't want to mess up what we have." Eleanor stood as well, walking over to stand beside him. She didn't say anything at first, just looked out at the city with him. There was a silence between them, a moment of shared understanding. It was as if they both knew that something had changed, but neither of them knew exactly what to do with it. "You won't mess it up," Eleanor said finally, her voice steady. "But you have to understand, Mark, this is a business arrangement. There's no room for emotions in this." Her words were firm, but Mark noticed the slight hesitation in her voice. It was almost as if she was convincing herself as much as she was convincing him. He nodded, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that emotions were already a part of this. He had already started to feel things he didn't expect, and no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, the connection between them was becoming undeniable. The next few days passed in a blur. Mark continued to attend events with Eleanor, playing the role of the perfect husband, always by her side, always in the public eye. But behind closed doors, things were different. The tension between them was palpable, and it was clear that their relationship, once based solely on the contract, was evolving into something more complicated. Mark could feel himself falling for her, but he wasn't sure if she felt the same way. Every time he thought he saw a crack in her armor, she would pull away, closing herself off once more. One evening, after a particularly successful charity event, they found themselves alone again, this time in Eleanor's office. She was finishing up some work, and Mark was sitting across from her, absent-mindedly flipping through a magazine. The silence between them felt heavy, and Mark couldn't take it any longer. "Eleanor," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine when I feel like I'm losing myself." Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "You're not losing yourself, Mark," she said, her tone softer than usual. "You're just learning who you are in a different world. This life isn't easy, and neither is our arrangement. But that doesn't mean it's not worth something." Mark's heart raced as he stared at her. For the first time in weeks, he felt like they were really talking, like she was being honest with him. "And what about us? What are we doing here, Eleanor?" There was a long pause as Eleanor's eyes softened. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "I don't know," she admitted. "But maybe that's the first step. We're not just going through the motions anymore, Mark. Something's changed, and we need to figure it out." Mark's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just about the contract anymore. Something deeper was stirring between them, and for the first time, he wondered if he was ready to confront it. To be continued. As the days passed, Mark and Eleanor found themselves navigating the delicate balance between their professional arrangement and the growing tension between them. It was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the attraction that was building, despite their clear boundaries. Every time they were together, whether at a high society event or in the privacy of their apartment, Mark couldn't help but notice the way his feelings for Eleanor were deepening. But Eleanor remained as composed as ever, her carefully constructed walls showing no signs of crumbling. Mark had always admired her strength, but now, he couldn't help but wonder if there was more to her than the businesswoman persona she displayed so effortlessly. It was late one evening when the moment they had both been avoiding finally came. After a long day of meetings and public appearances, Mark sat across from Eleanor at their dining table, the room dimly lit by the soft glow of the chandelier overhead. She was reviewing some documents, her focus unwavering as she flipped through the pages. Mark, however, couldn't concentrate. His mind kept drifting back to their conversation from a few days ago, the moment when he had admitted to feeling like he was losing himself in this arrangement. It was clear now that things had changed between them, but neither of them had yet acknowledged it. Finally, unable to hold back any longer, Mark cleared his throat. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice tinged with hesitation. "I can't keep pretending like this. Something's changed between us. I feel it, and I know you do too." Eleanor looked up from her papers, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she didn't say anything, and Mark began to doubt himself, wondering if he had overstepped his bounds. But then Eleanor placed her papers down and leaned back in her chair, her eyes locking with his. "I know," she said quietly, her voice surprisingly soft. "I've felt it too." Mark's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the response he had expected, and for the first time, he saw a crack in her carefully controlled exterior. "But," she continued, her tone firming once more, "that doesn't change anything. We made an agreement, Mark. And agreements are meant to be honored." Mark's breath caught in his throat. He had expected her to brush off his feelings, to push him away as she had done before, but this time was different. There was an openness in her words, a vulnerability that made him believe she was more than just a businesswoman. Mark's chest tightened as he processed her words. "So, what does this mean for us? For our arrangement?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. Mark followed her, his heart racing as he waited for her response. After a few moments of silence, Eleanor turned to face him. "It means that I'm not as unaffected by this as I've led you to believe," she said quietly. "But I also can't allow myself to get swept up in emotions. I've built this life, Mark. I can't let anything undermine it." Her words hit Mark like a punch to the gut. He had been hoping for something more, something real, but Eleanor's dedication to her empire was clear. She wasn't ready to risk it all for love, even if she was starting to feel it. For a moment, Mark didn't know what to say. He had hoped that Eleanor would see beyond the contract, that she would eventually allow herself to open up to him in the way he had started to open up to her. But now it was clear that she wasn't ready for that, and he wasn't sure if he could wait for her to change. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice low. Eleanor met his gaze, her expression softening just slightly. "Now," she said, "we continue as we have been. We honor our agreement. We keep things professional. And we take things one step at a time." Mark nodded, but inside, a feeling of doubt began to settle. He wasn't sure if he could keep pretending that everything was fine when his heart was telling him otherwise. As the days passed, the tension between them continued to simmer beneath the surface. They went through the motions of their arranged marriage, attending events, meeting clients, and maintaining the appearance of a perfect couple. But when they were alone, the silence between them grew louder, more uncomfortable. Mark had hoped that by now, things would have shifted, that Eleanor would have opened up to him more, but each day that passed, it seemed less likely. He had fallen for her, deeply, and yet, every time he tried to reach her, he was met with her walls, her coldness, her refusal to acknowledge the emotions that were growing between them. One evening, Mark found himself sitting in their living room, waiting for Eleanor to finish a call with one of her business partners. The apartment was quiet, and for the first time in a while, Mark let himself think about the future, about his life with Eleanor, and whether he could continue living in this strange, unfulfilled half-life they had created. He knew he couldn't keep going like this. He had tried to honor the arrangement, tried to convince himself that he could be content with just the business aspect of their marriage, but the truth was that he wanted more. He wanted her. He wanted a real connection, something that went beyond the contract they had signed. When Eleanor finally returned to the room, Mark stood up, his mind made up. "Eleanor," he began, his voice firm, "I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that this isn't affecting me. I need to know, do you feel the same way? Or am I just another business transaction to you?" Eleanor froze, her expression unreadable as she looked at him. For a moment, Mark thought she might walk away, but instead, she took a deep breath and met his gaze, her eyes full of something Mark couldn't quite place. "I feel it too," she whispered. "But I'm not ready to let go of my control. I don't know if I ever will be." Mark's heart sank as he realized the truth. He was falling in love with her, but she wasn't ready to take that step. And it left him wondering if he could continue living in this in-between world they had created. To be continued. Days passed after Mark's confession, and the tension between him and Eleanor was almost palpable. He had expected the conversation to lead to something more, a deeper connection, an acknowledgement of the feelings they both shared. But instead, he had been left with more questions than answers. Eleanor had admitted to feeling something, but she remained steadfast in her resolve to keep things professional, to keep everything within the boundaries of their arrangement. It was as if she couldn't or wouldn't let go of her control. And that left Mark in a strange position, torn between his growing love for her and the realization that she might never let herself fully feel for him the way he felt for her. Mark spent the next few days caught in a whirlwind of emotions. He couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward Eleanor, but at the same time, he couldn't deny the fact that he was slowly suffocating in this arrangement. They continued their routine, attending events, playing the part of a happily married couple, but it was clear to both of them that the facade was becoming harder to maintain. Every glance, every touch, carried a weight of unspoken words, and Mark couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could keep up the charade. It wasn't until one night, after a particularly exhausting charity event, that things finally came to a head. The two of them sat in the back of the car, the city lights flashing past them as they made their way back to their apartment. Eleanor sat across from Mark, her face expressionless, her mind seemingly somewhere else. Mark couldn't take the silence any longer. He had to know where they stood. "Eleanor," he said, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of frustration. "We need to talk." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she already knew what was coming. "What is it, Mark?" she asked, her tone cool but not unkind. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. "I can't keep pretending. I can't keep playing this role. We signed a contract, yes. But this isn't just a contract anymore. It's real. I'm in this, Eleanor. And I need to know, are you in this too?" There was a long pause as Eleanor remained silent, her gaze fixed out the window, avoiding his eyes. Mark's heart pounded as he waited for her response. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He knew that he had to take this step, to confront the truth of their situation. But what if she didn't feel the same? What if this was just a game to her, something she could walk away from at any time? The thought made him sick to his stomach. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice low but steady. "I don't know what you want from me, Mark," she said, her words carrying an edge of something unspoken. "I never promised you anything more than what we agreed to. You knew what this was from the start." Her words hit him like a cold slap, but he refused to back down. "I never asked for promises," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But I thought we had something real. Something beyond the contract. I thought maybe we could be something more." Eleanor's eyes flicked to him for a brief moment, and for the first time in a long while, Mark saw something other than the steel mask she usually wore. It was fleeting, but it was their vulnerability that she had never shown before. "I don't know how to do that," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to let go of control, Mark. I've spent my whole life building this empire, protecting myself. I can't just throw it all away because of feelings." The words were so raw, so uncharacteristically honest, that Mark's chest tightened. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He had never seen Eleanor like this, so fragile, so human. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. Instead, she seemed to soften, her hand gently resting against his. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I'm not asking you to throw everything away. I'm just asking for a chance. A chance to see if we can make this work. To see if there's something real between us, not just a contract. I'm not giving up on us. But I need to know that you're not either." Eleanor's eyes welled up with tears, but she quickly blinked them away, her gaze dropping to their joined hands. "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I'll try. For you. For us." Mark's heart soared at her words, but a part of him still felt uncertain. Was she saying this because she truly felt something for him, or because she felt obligated to keep their arrangement intact? He couldn't be sure. But he knew one thing for certain: couldn't walk away now. He had already fallen for her, and the thought of losing her was something he wasn't prepared to face. The car pulled up to their apartment, and for a moment, neither of them moved. They sat in the silence, their hands still clasped together, knowing that whatever happened next, things could never go back to the way they were. The truth was out now: there was something between them, something more than just a contract. And no matter how hard Eleanor tried to deny it, Mark knew she felt it too. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. To be continued. Days passed after Mark's confession, and the tension between him and Eleanor was almost palpable. He had expected the conversation to lead to something more: a deeper connection, an acknowledgement of the feelings they both shared. But instead, he had been left with more questions than answers. Eleanor had admitted to feeling something, but she remained steadfast in her resolve to keep things professional, to keep everything within the boundaries of their arrangement. It was as if she couldn't or wouldn't let go of her control. And that left Mark in a strange position, torn between his growing love for her and the realization that she might never let herself fully feel for him the way he felt for her. Mark spent the next few days caught in a whirlwind of emotions. He couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward Eleanor, but at the same time, he couldn't deny the fact that he was slowly suffocating in this arrangement. They continued their routine, attending events, playing the part of a happily married couple, but it was clear to both of them that the facade was becoming harder to maintain. Every glance, every touch, carried a weight of unspoken words, and Mark couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could keep up the charade. It wasn't until one night, after a particularly exhausting charity event, that things finally came to a head. The two of them sat in the back of the car, the city lights flashing past them as they made their way back to their apartment. Eleanor sat across from Mark, her face expressionless, her mind seemingly somewhere else. Mark couldn't take the silence any longer. He had to know where they stood. "Eleanor," he said, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of frustration. "We need to talk." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she already knew what was coming. "What is it, Mark?" she asked, her tone cool but not unkind. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. "I can't keep pretending. I can't keep playing this role. We signed a contract, yes. But this isn't just a contract anymore. It's real. I'm in this, Eleanor. And I need to know, are you in this too?" There was a long pause as Eleanor remained silent, her gaze fixed out the window, avoiding his eyes. Mark's heart pounded as he waited for her response. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He knew that he had to take this step, to confront the truth of their situation. But what if she didn't feel the same? What if this was just a game to her, something she could walk away from at any time? The thought made him sick to his stomach. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice low but steady. I don't know what you want from me, Mark, she said, her words carrying an edge of something unspoken. I never promised you anything more than what we agreed to. You knew what this was from the start. Her words hit him like a cold slap, but he refused to back down. I never asked for promises, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. But I thought we had something real. Something beyond the contract. I thought maybe we could be something more. Eleanor's eyes flicked to him for a brief moment, and for the first time in a long while, Mark saw something other than the steel mask she usually wore. It was fleeting, but it was there, a vulnerability that she had never shown before. I don't know how to do that, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know how to let go of control, Mark. I've spent my whole life building this empire, protecting myself. I can't just throw it all away because of feelings. The words were so raw, so uncharacteristically honest, that Mark's chest tightened. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He had never seen Eleanor like this, so fragile, so human. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. Instead, she seemed to soften, her hand gently resting against his. Eleanor, he said softly, I'm not asking you to throw everything away. I'm just asking for a chance. A chance to see if we can make this work. To see if there's something real between us, not just a contract. I'm not giving up on us, but I need to know that you're not either. Eleanor's eyes welled up with tears, but she quickly blinked them away, her gaze dropping to their joined hands. I don't know if I can, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But I'll try. For you. For us. Mark's heart soared at her words, but a part of him still felt uncertain. Was she saying this because she truly felt something for him, or because she felt obligated to keep their arrangement intact? He couldn't be sure. But he knew one thing for certain: couldn't walk away now. He had already fallen for her, and the thought of losing her was something he wasn't prepared to face. The car pulled up to their apartment, and for a moment, neither of them moved. They sat in the silence, their hands still clasped together, knowing that whatever happened next, things could never go back to the way they were. The truth was out now: there was something between them, something more than just a contract. And no matter how hard Eleanor tried to deny it, Mark knew she felt it too. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. To be continued. The days that followed were filled with a strange tension. Mark couldn't deny that the connection he had with Eleanor was deepening, but each time he allowed himself to feel something more, she seemed to pull away. They continued their business arrangement, attending events together, playing the part of a married couple. But behind closed doors, the distance between them only seemed to grow. Mark had hoped that, over time, Eleanor would open up to him, would allow herself to feel something more than the professional relationship they had. But it was clear that Eleanor's walls remained firmly in place, and Mark found himself questioning if he could keep going in this way. One evening, after another gala, Mark found himself staring out of the window of their luxurious apartment, feeling more isolated than ever. Eleanor was busy with work, as usual, and the emptiness of the room seemed to echo his feelings. He had told himself that he could handle this, that he could keep up the facade for the sake of his family, that he could live this way without allowing his emotions to get the better of him. But now, with the silence hanging between them, he realized how much he was truly struggling. He had started to care for Eleanor, deeply, but the more he cared, the more he felt like he was losing himself. Just as he was about to retreat into his thoughts, Eleanor walked into the room, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She paused when she saw him standing there, looking out the window, his expression distant. For a moment, she said nothing, just observed him, as if deciding whether or not to interrupt his solitude. "Mark," she finally said, her voice quiet but carrying a weight that made him turn to face her. "We need to talk." Mark's heart skipped a beat. He had been waiting for this moment, the moment when they would finally confront the unspoken tension that had been building between them. He nodded slowly, unsure of what to expect. "What's going on with us?" Eleanor asked, her eyes searching his face. "We've been living in this arrangement for weeks now, and yet, I can't shake the feeling that something has changed. That something's different between us. Mark felt his chest tighten. This was the moment he had feared, the moment when everything would come to a head. He had tried to keep his emotions in check, to focus on the business side of their arrangement, but it was clear that Eleanor had noticed. She wasn't as indifferent as she had appeared. "I don't know, Eleanor," Mark admitted, his voice soft but sincere. "I didn't expect things to get so complicated. I told myself I could keep my emotions out of this, but it's harder than I thought. I care about you, Eleanor. More than I ever expected. And I don't know how to keep pretending that this is just a business deal when my heart is telling me otherwise." For a long moment, Eleanor said nothing. Her expression was unreadable, and Mark couldn't tell if his confession had struck a nerve or if she was just processing his words. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, though there was a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "I never wanted this to become complicated," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could keep everything under control, keep it business, keep it professional. But the truth is, Mark, I'm not as unaffected by this as I've let on. I've started to care about you too. And it scares me." Mark's breath caught in his throat. For the first time, he saw a crack in Eleanor's armor. She was admitting to something she had been avoiding for so long, and he could feel the weight of her words settling in his chest. "I don't know how to let go of control," she continued, her voice barely audible. "I've spent my whole life building this empire, keeping everyone at a distance. And now, with you, I don't know what to do." Mark took a step toward her, his heart racing. He reached out, gently placing his hand on hers, the contact sending a jolt of electricity through him. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice filled with hope, "you don't have to do this alone. I'm here. We're in this together, no matter what happens." Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears she hadn't yet allowed herself to shed. For a moment, she simply looked at him, as if searching for something in his gaze. And then, with a small but genuine smile, she nodded. "I don't know what the future holds, Mark," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "but I'm willing to find out. Together." Mark's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and joy. He had wanted this for so long, but now that it was happening, he could hardly believe it. The walls that had separated them were finally starting to crumble, and he knew that, despite the challenges they would face, they had a chance to build something real. To be continued. The weeks that followed were filled with change, both for Mark and Eleanor. They continued to live under the same roof, still playing the part of a married couple for the world, but behind closed doors, everything was different. The walls that once separated them were slowly coming down, replaced by moments of real connection. Mark found himself no longer focused on the business arrangement that had initially brought them together. Instead, he was learning to love Eleanor not just for the woman who had saved him from his financial troubles, but for the woman who had finally allowed herself to be vulnerable, to feel something real. Eleanor, on the other hand, was learning to let go of the control she had clung to for so long. Her heart, once guarded and closed off, was opening in ways she had never expected. It wasn't easy for her. Every step toward intimacy felt like a leap of faith. But with Mark by her side, she was beginning to understand that there was more to life than just her empire, more than just the walls she had built around herself. One evening, after a quiet dinner at home, Eleanor found herself sitting next to Mark on the balcony, the cool night air brushing against their skin. They were no longer just two people playing a role, they had become partners in every sense of the word. Mark looked at her, his heart full of a warmth he hadn't known in years, and as he reached out to take her hand, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. This wasn't perfect, nothing in life ever was, but it was real, and it was theirs. "Eleanor," Mark said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "I never thought I'd find myself here. I never thought I'd find someone like you." Eleanor turned to face him, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "You've changed me, Mark," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "You've made me realize that there's more to life than what I've been holding on to. I'm scared, but I'm willing to try. For us." Mark smiled, his heart swelling at her words. They had come so far, both of them, and the future suddenly seemed full of possibilities. As they sat there, hand in hand, Mark couldn't help but think about the journey they had taken together. From the initial proposition and offer born out of desperation and necessitito, this moment, where they had built something real, something lasting. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges ahead. But for the first time, he felt like he could face them with Eleanor by his side. "I'm not afraid anymore," Mark said, his voice steady, full of conviction. "I'm ready for whatever comes next. As long as we're together." Eleanor squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I'm ready too," she replied softly. Together. They sat in silence for a while, watching the city lights twinkle below, knowing that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Days turned into weeks, and their bond continued to grow stronger. Mark started to take on more responsibilities within Eleanor's company, finding his place not just as her husband, but as her equal, her partner in every sense. Eleanor, in turn, began to let go of the tight grip she had always had on her life, allowing herself to trust Mark, to rely on him, in ways she never had before. They weren't just a business arrangement anymore, they were a family, a real family, with love and laughter and the promise of a future built on something far deeper than a contract. One afternoon, Mark came home to find Eleanor waiting for him in the living room, a smile playing on her lips. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice teasing but sincere. "Maybe we should make this official. No more pretending. No more contracts." Mark looked at her, his heart racing. "What do you mean?" Eleanor stood up, walking toward him. "I mean," she said, her smile widening, "that maybe it's time for us to get married for real. No more business, just us." Mark's heart skipped a beat, and without thinking, he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Yes," he whispered, his voice full of emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." And so, they began their new life together, not as a business arrangement, not as a contract, but as two people who had found something real in the most unexpected of places. They had started with a promise, but what they had built was far more than either of them could have ever imagined. It was love, and it was theirs to cherish. From that day forward, they faced the world together, knowing that no matter what came next, they had already found their home in each other. To be continued.